Baruch Hashem. Today's Daf Yomi is the Daf Yomi for Zayin Cheshvan for the yard site of Meir Shapiro, Zecher Tzadok Uvracha, who founded the Daf Yomi, and he inspired all of us with his dedication. And so, even though I just got off the plane, I'm very tired. Baruch Hashem, this is the Daf Yomi. We have to do it today of all days. So today's Daf is Zevachim Daf Mem Hey Zevachim 45, and we're going to start with the Mishnah. 5 lines from the top. It says the Mishnah, Kodshe Ovdei Kochavim, the sacrifices, the sacred offerings of an idolater, meaning to say if an idolater makes the dedication to the temple, Ein Chayavin Aleim Misham Pigol, you're not going to be liable if the Kohen has a Pigol thought when it comes to the idolater, or no, sir, you're not going to be liable for kares if you eat the Pigol or the noser, the expired meat, vitame, or somebody who is, or if you eat them while it's tamei, or if somebody who's tamei eats them, shochtam b'chutz, or if somebody slaughters these sacrifices outside of the temple, potter, then they're going to be exempt. They're going to be exempt. Under those circumstances, you're not going to be liable for kares or achatas. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, this is the position of Rabbi Shimon, where it's Rabbi Yossi Mechayev. Rabbi Yossi says you will be liable under those circumstances. So says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, we're talking about the Kodshe Ovdei Kochavim. When it comes to the sacred offerings that are dedicated to the temple by an idolater, well, nanin, then you're not allowed to benefit from them, meaning that you're not allowed to improperly benefit from them. But also, if you do benefit from them, you're not going to be considered in violation of the prohibition of mi'ilah, of misappropriation of temple property, meaning you're not allowed to benefit rabbinically. You're not liable for pigol. And if you try to exchange it with another animal, it does not make a tamur, it does not make an exchanged animal. And when you bring these animals, we're going to say that idolater does not bring a nisachim, the libations on their own, without a carbon. A Jew, we learned also already earlier in our tractate, and we learned in Menachos, can bring an independent libation, but idolater can't. Avol karbanon, but their offerings do ta'un nisachim. Rabbi Shimon says their offerings do require these libations that accompany the sacrifice, a grain and a wine libation. Rabbi Yossi, he says, I'm strict in all of these cases. In all these cases, I say by the sacrifices of the idolaters to be strict, just like the sacrifices of the Jewish people. Because it says about these offerings, it says La Hashem. Asher yakrivu Hashem. And because it says Ish Ish Mi Beis Yisrael, and we expound this in a kol shochten Ish Matamom or Ish Ish. Why does it say twice a double person? Rabbah says Ovdei Kohanim should know during the Durham and Davos Kishot that they're allowed to make voluntary vows like the Jewish people. The Medvar Mamurim Bekachim Mizbeach, when it comes to the offerings that are sacred for the altar. Well, Kachi Bedek Habayis, but when it comes to the offerings whose value is what's dedicated, not the offering itself, and then you can commit mi'ilah within the biblical trespass. So now we analyze this brisa. Says the Gemara, biblically speaking, you're not allowed to benefit. But it's not a biblical violation of mi'ilah. The Gemara mi'ilah, because we learn mi'ilah, we learn it out. Chet mitruma. We take the word sin from truma. To be truma ksiv b'nei Israel, the law of the Chachamim. We know that the law of a truma, who has to separate this tithe, the Jewish people, but not the idolater. So therefore, also there's no me'ilah. You're also not going to be liable for pigol, noser, and tummy. Why not? My time. The asi pigol avon noser, because we compare the word pigol to noser. Asi noser chil mituma, and we compare noser to tuma. Ubetuma ksiv b'nei Yisrael of the kochavim. And when it comes to tuma, if somebody eats it while he is tamei, we're going to say that only applies to the Jewish people and not to the idolaters. So therefore, we're going to say that if you eat the meat of the idolater, the sacrificial offering of the idolaters, well, to me, you're not going to be liable for carbons. The eno is in tamur, and it does not make an exchange animal. My time, the iskish tamur or meiser behema, because tamur is compared to meiser behema. By Meiser Behema, it says, V'haya'u Tumuraso. And And then we say Meiser Behema Iskish Meiser Dagon. A Meiser Behema is compared to a Meiser Dagon, to the Meiser of the grain. Well, Meiser Dagon given by the Meiser of the grain, it says Bnei Israel. It says that this is a law for the Jewish people to separate Wolf de Kochavim, but not the adult. The Gemara says, wait 1 second, you're learning it out. Tomorrow from Meiser Behema, which is self-worked out from Meiser Dagon. So therefore, Meiser Behema is itself only learned out through a comparison from Meiser Dagon. And then you're going to then learn it out again to Tamura from that. Gemara says, well, Meiser Dagon is chulin. Meiser the grain is not sacred, it's chulin, and we can't. By kachim, we can't do it. And we're going to learn that in the next chapter. Gemara says, Hani chamandam or basar muhammad aslan. And that's only if we go following the one that's doing the teaching. Chamandam or basar, well, we made aslan. But according to one that says we follow the one who is taught, then it's kachim, Michael Meimer. What would you say in this case? Al Meister Behema is a chova shein kavua lazman. So Meister Behema, the tithe of the animal, is an obligation that there's no fixed time to. Chova shein lazman kavua Yisrael Meisu of the Chova. And a Jew can bring, but not an idolater. And then once we have that, we compare it to Tamura. Tana Rabbanan. So the Brisa continues. Ezrach, it says in the pasuk, Kol Ezrach yaseh kachas elu akriv yishei reach mekochash. Every citizen should bring. Ezrach may be nitzachim, ve'ein, no v'kochavim may be nitzachim, but idolater cannot bring nitzachim, these libations independently. Yachol teo ulasut from nitzachim. I might think even his sacrifices don't require nitzachim. Amomer kacha. So it says in the verse, kacha yaseh. No, the sacrifices require nitzachim, but they cannot bring an independent nitzachim. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi says, Roani b'kol lahachmir. I'm always going to be strict about the offerings of the idolaters. But when do we say this? By the offerings of the altar? But but by the offerings of the value of the temple, everybody says it is me'ila. So that's what the Brisa said, or Mohammed. So the Gemara says, Aval, my time, or what's the reason that Rabbi Shimon says that by Koche Bedek Habayis, by Koche Amizbeach, that there's no Me'ila? What's the reason? Because Sabra Kigamra Me'ila, because he says we learn out Me'ila from Truma, Dumya to Truma. The Kedusha Sakuf. He says it has to be similar to Truma, which has an inherent value. And that comes to exclude the idolaters, and that comes to exclude the idolaters. So basically, he's of the position Kigamar Me'ila Chayilchem Truma. When the law of Me'ila was learned out from comparing it to Truma, Dumya de Truma de Kadisha Kedusha Saguf. It's only that type of similar thing that's like Truma, which is sanctified with inherent sanctity. But Kedusha's Bedek Habayis, the Kedusha's Tamim will. But something that was Kedusha's Bedek Habayis, it's just a value of it, that is not going to be excluded. And so therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, even if they were consecrated by an idolater, they're going to be chayev in Elah. So basically, according to Rabbi Shimon, you're only liable from Elah if the idolater's offering is Bedek Habayis, value for the temple. Rabbi Yossi says, even if it's Kedushas Haguf, Kedushas Mizbeach, we're going to say you're liable. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, Dam Shenitma V'Zarku B'Shogeg. Let's say you have blood that became Tamei, and the Kohen accidentally threw it against the altar. If he did it B'Shogeg, courts. If he did it accidentally, it's okay, and the meat can be eaten. Let's say he did it intentionally, well, hurtza. Then if he did it intentionally, it's not going to be acceptable. And Raj said this is a kinasa de rabbanan. This is a rabbinic prohibition, rabbinic fine, punishment. But not that he should bring another one, because they're not going to allow the court to uproot something from the Torah and to bring a chul into the Azara. So it means that he can't eat from the meat. That's by individual offering. Whether accidentally or intentionally, it's going to be acceptable and atonement too. By idolater, it's never going to work. By shogeg or or even b'shogeg, it's not going to work. So, Amru Rabban Kameid Rav Papa, come on, who is this like? To look at Rabbi Yossi. This position is not like Rabbi Yossi. Di Rabbi Yossi, Amar B'Kon Ani Ro'ah. We're saying all of them, I'm going to be strict and say it's like the offering of a mizbeach, and say it's like the offering of a Jew. But in this case, the Bryce is saying that there's a distinction between the offering of a Jew and an idolater. But idolater, beim shon beim mezel horza. Amar Rav Papa, afilo tema Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Papa said to them, you could even say it's Rabbi Yossi. Shani Asa, no, that case over there is going to be different. Meaning to say the case of the blood is different. Why? The Amar Kra Lahem, because the pasuk says that he wore the tzitz for them, specifically for the Jews, Lahem for the Jews and not for the idolaters. And so therefore the tzitz, which would typically be miratza, be an atonement for the blood that was sprinkled when you're tamei, is going to only apply for the Jews. When it states those who are tamei, when it says that people who are tamei should leave the kodesh, should leave the kachim, do you mean to say that only Jews that consecrate items are prohibited by the tamei, but not idolaters? Rabbi Yossi says we're machmir. It's the tzitz. Purpose of the tzitz is to find an atonement for them, and the idolaters, they don't have that benefit. So now up to the next Mishnah. If there are those items that you're not going to be liable on them because of pigol, for example, like we discussed, those items that are on the matirim themselves, like the komets or the ketores, and everything that we learned in our Mishnah, you're going to be liable on them still for nosar, for the expired, if they expire, umishum tamei, and you're going to be liable for them if you eat it while you're tamei, chutz min adam, except for blood. So, with the exception of the blood, Raj says the imut be'ajay, as the Gemara is going to say, it's explicitly excluded. But when it comes to pigol, when it comes to tuma, kares, somebody eats them in a state of tuma saguf, v'kol shegosam chatas. If you do it accidentally, you're going to get chatas. Rabbi Shimon mechayev v'davar shedarko le'achol. Rabbi Shimon says you're only liable if it's something that people typically eat. And even though it's burnt, if it's not typically eat, you're not going to be liable. If you're going to eat the wood and the hold on one second. Just want to say one thing. You're not going to be liable for the wood and the ravona, the frankincense and the ketores on account of tumah. So that's the position of Rabbi Shimon. That's the position that argues with Rabbi Shimon. So the Brisa says, I might have thought you're only being liable for tumah on something that has a matir for it, both for human or for the altar. Vidinu, and we could actually say that this is a logical argument. Why? Ma pigol shehu bikvia ubiyadia achas lo hutar mikwalo en chayav en al davar sheyesh matim. Just like pigol, which is something that is a fixed chatas offering, and you're liable even on the basis of one awareness. Well, hutar mikwalo, and has no exceptions. You're only liable if it's something that has a matirin. Tuma, which is it's a variable offering, and you need to be aware both times. And there's an exception to tuma. but Sibor. For sure, you should only be liable if it's something that has a matir being or other being was male. So the pasuk says that asher makdishim li, that which they consecrate to me. Meaning, say, even if there's no matir, yachol miyad, I might think from the moment you consecrate it, from the moment it's brought. Is it really the case that tummy person who touches it is chayev? Not chayev for kares. So it's referring to the offering has now been capable of being brought. When if it has matirin, it's only once the matirin are brought. Only once it's consecrated. So the Gemara says, we found the source of the prohibition of eating in Tumah. Noser minon. How do we know the same law from Noser? Asi chil only Tumah. So we learn it out from Tumah by doing Zer Shava. The Gemara says, why don't we compare it to Pigov? Only Pilgo, and then you get the opposite rule. From Mistamer Tumah Avon came Gezel Simon. No, we have the mnemonic of Gezel, which Rashi tells us is Guf, Zrikas Adam, and Chil, which they share with, which Noser shares with Tumah. Adrabah Mipigov Avon Shekain Putar Sitz Taor, Bisman, and Karav. You have all these characteristics, and this is even greater. So therefore, the Gemara says, how do we know that it's referring to Noser? Explain me. So we see from here, Torah is referring to two things. The prohibition or the qualification of Noser and the disqualification of Tum. This is Baruch Hashem, today's daf, and thank you for joining. Shkoyach.